What unimaginable power humble words hold? What joy and chaos in equal measure a twisted inflection can wring? In a world where so much of our lives are violently wrenched from our hands, where anything and everything has the potential to go horribly wrong, there's a certain strained comfort in the fact that the one thing we can claim total ownership of is our words. Firewatch, Camposanto's brilliant addition to the narrative-heavy adventure game genre, holds this idea at its core. Unlike its comrades, there aren't really any big decisions to be made. No life or death scenarios. You can't change the outcome of the game. No matter what you do, the fire always comes, and you always leave with a sense that things are somewhat unresolved. It's a game that asks not what you would do if faced with an impossible decision, but rather what happens next. Actions speak louder than words, but what if words are all you have? Surprisingly, with this key element of design flipped on its head, playing Firewatch still feels like an open expression of autonomy, and perhaps being freshly unburdened by the chains of fate is the key to this. Or maybe the value of communication has always existed, independent of its effects. Let's talk about this. In the absence of those big bad moral decisions you'll find in many of its contemporaries, Firewatch offers something a little more relaxed. The bulk of your time in the wilderness is spent following the instructions of your long-distance colleague Delilah and... Actually, no. The bulk of your time is spent walking, and that's an important distinction. It almost seems cliché at this point to say that it's the journey, not the destination, that's important, but it's true. In this particular case, the downtime in Firewatch is where the magic happens. It's also perhaps why it is better described as a walking simulator than any other game of its ilk. It's quite literally what you're doing. There is some navigation and orienteering, climbing up and rappelling down, but I wouldn't necessarily say that any of these are defining features of the game. Not in the way walking is. And it's not even the walking that's the important part. Rather, what happens alongside it. Henry is alone in the wilderness. Except he's not. His trusty radio, every bit as essential as the Master Sword to Link, or the whip to Simon Belmont, or blind homicidal rage to Kratos. It's one of your only means of interaction, and it quickly becomes an essential part of the experience. As gobsmackingly beautiful as Shoshone National Forest is, the wilderness alone does not encourage one to be forthcoming about their past or their reasons for refuge. Through this small device though, one you wield and operate through the controller as you would in real life, the player can basically have their cake and eat it. Physical solitude, cut with emotional companionship. When denied the sort of face-to-face interaction that many of us expect, you're also removing some of the vital things we rely on in our day-to-day communications. Facial tics, body language, subtle behavioral modes that supplement the information we get from words. Without them, how we speak changes drastically. Dialogue in Firewatch is approached with this in mind. It concerns itself with the importance of clarity, descriptive qualities of the world around you, with an underlying ambiguity that is played on repeatedly throughout the game. And so, choice words travel from player fingers to Henry's voice, and a friendship blossoms, or doesn't. Tragic backstories and dark, shameful secrets unearthed, or they don't. Henry and Delilah's conversations might still operate largely as a tool for narrative exploration, but it's framed more as a means for the player to express something about themselves, not in details, but in mannerisms, in anxieties and frustrations. And the consequence of choice is reflected in how Delilah sees Henry, how she talks to him, what she says about herself in response. We know Henry. We know him intimately. Those heartbreaking opening minutes pull you with some terrible force through a life lived with love and loss. It's a shorthand account of a much more complex and awful situation, but it's enough to know that any exposition on Henry's part is not for the player's benefit. And that's an odd choice. but it plays back into this idea that dialogue options in Firewatch are largely absolved of their responsibility towards its plot. Henry and Delilah are pivotal to the events that take place over that summer in 1989, only in so much as they are physically there. But they are not this narrative atlas, this storytelling cipher holding together a player-curated timeline of events. Henry is a bystander, as much so as the hands guiding him. In Delilah, he finds a professional relationship that, no matter your choices, is always there. The missing girls, the mysterious figure stalking them, the abandoned research center fenced off, all these things investigated regardless of affection or animosity, not to mention actually doing their job. You know, the one they're paid to do, watching out for those fires. Every big, scary, life-changing, world-shattering event in Firewatch has already happened. Julia's illness, Delilah's cowardice, Brian Goodwin's death, and Ned's subsequent abandonment of civilization. The player might not have any say in how the world around them steadily ticks over, but because choice is framed exclusively as a personal, social affair, they can still affect the lens through which they view these happenings. Henry and Delilah can bear witness to these terrible discoveries as colleagues, as friends, or even an implied something more. Firewatch stands out as a reminder that we don't always need impact and grave consequence for our choices to be meaningful. As a structured, authored story, it presents a competent and at times surprising mystery. But where it really shines is in these seemingly inconsequential interactions between its two leads. Interactions that are purely at the discretion of the player themselves, an expression of freedom you just don't normally get in games.
Sure you are.
I am.
I don't know what that means.
It doesn't matter, I get it. With Julia and everything, you probably don't want to be here.
I don't know if that's true.
Forget I said anything. I just meant I like that you're here. Why don't we both just go watch this fire and try to imagine all the old, dead things it's burning away?